Hello and welcome to the 32nd episode of the Special Needs Voice podcast. My name is Aaron. Our goal with this podcast is simple: to share the stories and perspectives from the top leaders in our special needs community. By the conclusion of each episode, we hope you have laughed at least once, learned something new, and are better equipped to handle your next challenge. Today, Mike Walther, founder and president of Wealth Advisors, will be speaking with Aidan Crawford. Aidan is a junior at Loyola University and the starting goalkeeper for the men's soccer team. Beyond the field, he is a passionate advocate for the disability community, inspired by his younger sister Katia, who has Down syndrome. From an early age, Aidan has been actively involved with various organizations, including Special Olympics, and successfully led the charge of establishing a Special Olympics chapter at Loyola. Aidan was recently recognized when he was named captain of the inaugural Allstate NACDA Good Works team, prestigiously honoring student athletes making impacts in their communities.
All right, hi, this is Mike Walther, the founder and president of Wealth Advisors with the Special Needs Voice podcast. In today's episode, we're really honored to be joined by Aidan Crawford, a collegiate student athlete who recently won a very special NCAA award we'll be talking about a little bit later. Aidan, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you for that introduction, and I appreciate the invitation for me to join you all today. And I'm grateful to be able to contribute to so many great conversations that you've had on this platform here.
Well, we're lucky to have you. And by way of background, Aidan has grown up on the North Shore of Chicago and is a Loyola University student. What makes him special to our group is that he happens to have two siblings, and one of whom was born with Down syndrome. So Aidan, maybe start off with kind of your childhood experiences of growing up in a family with two siblings, one of whom happens to have a disability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I have an older brother, Sean, and a younger sister, Katia, who has Down syndrome. And so, yeah, when I think about some things we all did together, we all grew up playing sports. I remember, going to my older brother's soccer games and wanting to become a goalkeeper. He wasn't a goalkeeper, but just watching his games and watching his teammates, that was kind of how I latched onto the position. And Katia has probably been to at least 100 of my soccer games. She's been to lots of college games, and she goes on the road when my parents come and visit me, and we play out on the East Coast. She's always there as well. So, and she's always loved playing sports as well, through Special Olympics or top soccer. So I'd say some of the best memories of the three of us come through sports, and, also just family memories, memories of holidays. And my mom is the youngest of five, and much of her family is still in the Chicagoland area. And, since my mom is the youngest amongst her siblings, my sister, brother, and I, we grew up the youngest in this big extended family. And so, I had great memories of, Easter egg and Easter basket hunts, and, Christmas Day at my grandma's house, where, Katia, being the youngest, would hold the record like every year for receiving the most presents from our extended family. So yeah, lots of great memories, the three of us.
That's awesome. Any funny stories that come to mind? I know that we just got a book published called It's Okay to Laugh, and there may or may not be some stories about Katia in there with a different name so that protect the innocent. Any stories you want to share about your sister that you can remember?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And it's wonderful that you have a book about this. And I think, unfortunately, there are so many stories that are going to slip my mind here. But, we were talking, I was often on the side of my parents in finding some of my sister's actions not very funny, and I think the reason for that is, well, you have to understand, I'm less than 2 years older than Katia. And so, like one story that does come to mind is, when I must have been 10 or so, and, Katia must have been 8 or 9 at the time. And, my whole family was driving somewhere. I think like we must have been heading to like church on a Sunday or something. And it was a nice day. And we had, the car windows down in our Honda minivan. My brother, sister, and I were all like, packed into the back of the minivan. And so we're in the back, windows down, driving down Lake Avenue in Wilmette, which is a busy street. And I think Katia had this plastic water bottle that she was drinking from. And, after finishing her water, she like casually tossed it out the window as we're going, like 30, 40 miles per hour down the street, surrounded by all these, other cars. And I just remember feeling this sort of like social embarrassment in the moment, like what must these other people around us in these other cars. Think of us seeing this water bottle just, being thrown out and littered on the street. And so, my brother, who's also sitting in the back there, having seen this, was laughing. And I'm thinking, like, if I were to ever do that, my parents would have been upset at me. And so, of course, I'm calling up to my parents in the front seat, like tattling on Katia. And all I remember, getting out of that is one of them, I forget if it was my mom or dad, but they just like turned around and basically told Katia, like, oh, you can't do that. And I just remember being like, what? That's it? Like, I guess I was looking for more justice, or parenting in that moment, because I myself, being about her same age, would have been, scolded a bit more seriously. So I guess I would sometimes even try to take on that parent role. And I think, maybe because I would often try to compare, Katia's development to my own. But, as you've discussed, like as I've grown up, I've come to recognize that I can have that role to some extent, but my parents know what they're doing, and they certainly recognize these differences between how much they can try to, control some of those funny moments that happen.
Absolutely. That's great. I think, a lot of us who have siblings, feel the same thing. Like they got away with murder when we were kids, right? They could do almost anything, like, oh, that's okay. And I'm like, if I did that, there would have been consequences. So thanks for sharing that. It's great to hear from fellow siblings that we're all living very similar lives to our loved ones. We love our siblings and they do get away with murder. So thanks for sharing that. You mentioned earlier with your sister, being involved with sports as well. Can you talk about how you got involved with Special Olympics, maybe your earliest experiences and how you've taken that forward into college?
Well, yeah, first, I think, Katia has been involved in Special Olympics from a very young age. And I remember going to her, basketball and track and field events when she was young. And so, she was very competitive, and she often won her events in track. And I remember, that just making me proud because, as I mentioned, my whole family is pretty involved in sports. So those were always fun events to be a part of, and being able to support her. I think my personal involvement came first through volunteering with Wilmette Stars, operating out of Mackenzie Elementary School, which was the elementary school that I went to. But I believe, I was in middle school, so it must have been fifth grade maybe. And my brother was also a volunteer coach at the time. And so I kind of followed him in his footsteps there in getting involved in Special Olympics. And, Katia was on this team as well. But I remember I would mostly work with one of my own peers who was in my own grade. And he was very tall. He must have been over 6 foot already when we were in fifth or sixth grade. And he loved basketball. And so we kind of connected through playing basketball together at these practices. And so it's kind of that idea of like connection through a shared passion of sports that kind of helped me latch on to Special Olympics. And I'll say another like significant memory of when I was first introduced to Special Olympics at, a large scale, because Special Olympics is a statewide, nationwide and even like an international organization, was this memory of, maybe when I was in sixth or seventh grade and going with my dad and Katia to the Illinois State summer games that were hosted at Illinois State University. And, the opening ceremony there was, held within their football stadium. And, they had the lighting of the Flame of Hope and the torch run. And I mean, the stadium was packed with fans, and these Special Olympics teams from all across the state were coming out on the field and being recognized. And, before then, I had only really been a part of a local or regional competition, but this kind of showed me just how big Special Olympics is as an organization.
That's amazing. I think that's one of the things that I wish everyone could see. A big Special Olympics statewide or national event where there is so much joy in that building. It's a pretty special feeling. I know the overall Olympics we'll have, coming up this winter in Italy will be amazing for all that pride and joy, but the Special Olympics brings that to another level. So when you got to college, you'd done Special Olympics throughout high school. How is it, for someone who's thinking about, well, I'd like to do that, and what Aidan said sounds really interesting about Special Olympics. I've got some friends I'd like to get involved with to do that. How have you been able to juggle that? Because academics, athletics at a high level like you're playing, and then Special Olympics is a lot of time commitment. Any words of advice for your peer fellow students who might be a little bit younger to want to follow in your footsteps?
Yeah, I think like when I did get to high school and academics and my involvement with soccer became a little bit more serious. I think back on my high school experience, and it was a little bit different just because of COVID-19. I started high school in 2018 and graduated in 2022. So around like the second half of my sophomore year through all the way when I graduated, a lot of organized activities had to be converted to online forums. And so, playing high school soccer, I just think back on that as being like such a great experience for me. Many soccer players who are looking to play in college now are forced to kind of play through these club teams. These academies or these club teams are usually higher level competition and provided much more exposure to college recruiters. But my high school sports experience at New Trier was amazing, and I feel very lucky that I was able to be recruited to a Division I school through that pathway, because there's so much more camaraderie and there's so much more culture within a high school team. And it also provided me a little bit more flexibility in my schedule to be able to be involved in some of these other things that I was passionate about. And these club teams, which pull usually the best players from many, different high schools across the Chicagoland area and even parts of, like Wisconsin and Indiana. They can have that social aspect of sports, but there's something great about being part of like a community of athletes where you see them on a daily basis, in the hallways or at lunch, and you grew up with them. And so I think that was also what was great about New Trier's Special Olympics program, because all the athletes grew up alongside each other, and so many high school student volunteers who were involved were also a part of it for a long period of time. So I can't necessarily like speak from an athlete perspective, but the program built that like social aspect of sports that I love so much from my own experiences of high school soccer. So I love just being able to contribute to that and be a part of that. And it was a bit strange when practices went to like Zoom. It provided me a little bit more flexibility, when it did become virtual, because as I started to have more and more roles with soccer, it helped me kind of like bounce my role as a volunteer, because I was actually able to attend more of these Zoom practices. But I also saw it as like this real effort from everyone involved to kind of try to keep that social aspect of Special Olympics and sports. And so yeah, it was a bit strange. I remember like we were doing like yoga and push-ups over Zoom practices, but it also kind of allowed for athletes and peers and coaches just to talk and connect with each other through things like icebreaker questions or games of that sort, which I think were especially needed at that time. So it was something that I loved being a part of. And so I think I kind of wanted to make the time for it.
Love that perspective. I love just thinking back. It wasn't that long ago that COVID affected everyone, and to hear that your training was impacted, but maybe your communication skills improved as a result of having to do it through Zoom and having to really reach out and connect with your teammates in the soccer team and the participants in Special Olympics for those activities as well. So for the listeners who may not have followed the Atlantic 10 closely for the last couple of years for soccer, what they should know is that Aidan Crawford's not just a soccer player at Loyola. He was named the goalkeeper of the year for the conference. So your exploits continued on at a very high level in college. So it's not like Aidan's just playing soccer on a club team somewhere off on the side. He's playing at the elite level, Division I soccer in the Atlantic 10, and actually performing at a very high level. So the fact that you're able to do that at 10 class and create a Special Olympics program that didn't exist is pretty amazing. Can you share with me how you get to Loyola? You've got all that going on, trying to launch your soccer career there as an athlete, trying to figure out all the new student stuff. And then how'd that light bulb go on that, hey, wait, there isn't a Special Olympics program here? I think there should be.
Yeah, so back in around 2021 or 2022, I had committed to play soccer at Loyola Chicago. And so even prior to my freshman year here at Loyola, before I stepped on campus, I went online and I wanted to connect with the Special Olympics organization here at Loyola, since I had been involved with Special Olympics throughout high school and middle school for around 8 years. And so I came to find that there wasn't any sort of contact, or there didn't seem to be any sort of active organization online. And so I even looked around like other Chicago schools, and I looked at whether or not they had a Special Olympics organization. It seems like Special Olympics Illinois colleges typically have an organization. And I even looked out at Chicago, Loyola Chicago's medical school, which is out west in Maywood, and they seem to have an active Special Olympics club. But in terms of the undergraduate campus here on the Lakeshore, there was no sign of a student organization for Special Olympics. So yeah, and it was kind of this like moment where I wanted to, be a part of bringing that to Loyola. It wasn't like an, oh, well, that's a bummer moment. It was one where I kind of saw it as an opportunity because, one would expect that a Jesuit university, which prides itself and has a student body committed to service towards others within the very city where the first Special Olympics games were held,
right,
would have a Special Olympics student organization. So like I said, even before I stepped on campus, helping start this kind of program kind of became a goal of mine. And so my freshman year, I simply reached out like via email to the campus activities network, which oversees all the student organizations. And I mean, this was a goal of mine to start ASAP, my first semester. And so when I got an email back, kind of summarizing this whole process of what that looks like, it was a bit overwhelming. And not to labor on about the exact details, but you had asked about like how some others might look to follow in footsteps. But, I learned that you needed to do things like you need to like write a constitution. You needed to write basically essays about how this organization represents the university values, and you needed everything from your mission statement to an email address to like a website. And so in addition to that, you needed a list of potential members. You needed a list of executive board members. You needed even like a faculty advisor to represent your organization. Basically, you couldn't just create a student organization by yourself. You needed time, effort, patience, and a lot of help from other people who are going to be, just as committed to the process as yourself. And so freshman year me was like a little bit overwhelmed, but I recognized that there were clear steps to this. And so I guess long story short, after a lot of like promotion and incredible buy-in from so many others on campus, the organization was officially recognized at the start of my fourth semester, which was January 2024, my second semester of my sophomore year. And so yeah, like what exactly do we do as a student organization? Well, like we continued to kind of figure that out. It's a work in process about what is both realistic, but also, what creates the most impact. And so we don't have a student body of Special Olympics athletes here at Loyola Chicago. That's not the case at some other universities and colleges in Illinois particularly, but we immediately sought out to partner with Misericordia Home, which is about a mile down the road from our Lakeshore campus, and is one of the largest residential homes for adults with intellectual disabilities, intellectual and developmental, in the entire country. And so what I think, is so great about Misericordia Home is that they're not just a residential home or facility. When you think of residential communities, there's this risk of, viewing these organizations as almost a way to close off a community of atypical individuals from the rest of society. And this is a real concern when we think about disability studies and ethics of disability within society. And my minor here at Loyola is bioethics. And so I've written lots of essays and talked about this a lot in discussions in class. But with all that said, I think that Misericordia makes a very strong effort to avoid this kind of framework. And I think they do that by mostly like valuing integration and community partnerships and community engagement. And my older brother, Sean, who I mentioned earlier, he's 4 years older than me. He actually worked at Misericordia Home for about 2 or 3 years. And he worked within one of the residential homes, and they would often go on community outings. Like my brother is really into music, and he was able to set up a bunch of his residents to come with him to a music concert he was going to. And so it was an avenue for us to get connected with Misericordia's Special Olympics team because they did have athletes that we could get involved with and they were right nearby. And it's a really well-run team. They have a lot of really fun athletes who all love sports. And again, there's something to be said about building connections through that shared passion of sports. And Misericordia certainly has athletes who love sports. And they've got a great program there in Department of Rec and Leisure. And they've even got like a bowling alley that we help out with organizing some bowling nights. So yeah, we're partnering with Misericordia and we send volunteers weekly to their Special Olympics practices and those sports vary from season to season. But we're also kind of looking for this growth on campus as well. A big part of Loyola's mission and the Jesuit mission is to create leaders in social justice. So in addition to the service or volunteering aspect of our organization, we try to make a difference on campus as well. So this comes through stuff like advocacy or awareness events. And even later this month, what we're planning right now is a crafts event on campus that kind of supports both of our organization's missions of both service and advocacy and awareness, where we have this crafts event where we, are writing cards and individualized messages to the Misericordia athletes that qualify for the winter basketball state game. So yeah, we're writing cards, we're making a banner. We've got these like craft pennants we're making, but it's just kind of a way to bring together students on, like an October Saturday morning towards supporting Misericordia athletes. Some other things we've done on campus are we got a bunch of students to represent Special Olympics Illinois in the Mag Mile Parade in downtown Chicago. So they have this Rudolph float that goes down Michigan Avenue that Special Olympics Illinois puts on. Uh-huh. And I mean, this event is viewed by over 1 million people. I think they estimated there were 700,000 people in attendance, but it's televised online.
Sure.
And so there's a group of Loyola students from our student org who were helping to carry this Rudolph down Michigan Avenue. So it's we want to continue to grow, and we already have this great partnership with Misericordia. Now our focus is a little bit more on that on-campus work. Our one of our goals is organizing some sort of equipment drive or fundraiser. We also want to find more opportunities to bring Special Olympics athletes from Misericordia to Loyola basketball games this winter. Mm-hmm. So yeah, to bring it all together, you had asked kind of about this growth, and I think each semester we've grown in different ways and how we can make an impact in both like social justice, but also through service.
That's absolutely amazing. I think anybody who listens to that full response to a question about how you're able to grow Special Olympics will understand how totally committed you are. It wasn't I'm going to do this, check the box, add it to my resume. It was I want to make an impactful difference that'll be, growing even after I'm gone. But what you've done in just a couple of years is truly amazing. And it's wonderful that this new opportunity that the NCAA has put together, which is called the Allstate NACDA Good Works Team, which is meant to identify the very best across all of collegiate athletics of people doing things to really better the world, to find an organization that they can impact and make a big difference in other people's lives. And so how did you first learn that you were going to be named to the inaugural Allstate NACDA Good Works Team?
Yeah, well, last year, it must have been in the spring semester, the academic staff within the athletic department had reached out to me and they said that they were going to nominate me for this team. And so they were just they asked some clarifying questions about my work, and they asked me to share more about, the kind of impact that it has had on campus. And I think they submitted a nomination for me, but it wasn't something that I really knew much about. And then, this summer I was contacted by our soccer team's media director, and I can pull up the text here, but basically he said, hey, you were selected for this team. I don't really know other details, but
that's
congrats.
Amazing.
Yeah. And then I also heard from my head coach who congratulated me and kind of said the same thing of like, don't really know the details, but, they're planning to recognize you at our upcoming game. And I didn't learn until the actual recognition at this game that there was this captain role for this national team that I was selected for.
Again, congratulations on that. That's an incredible achievement. If you think about it, folks, if you're listening to this, the Heisman Trophy is competed for by really every single collegiate football player, and that's one sport. Aidan was chosen amongst all of his peers playing sports across all different universities and all different athletics as the captain of this good works team. And so as a result of that, when they came to make the actual in-person announcement, it wasn't just anybody. It was Holly Rowe, who's a Hall of Fame announcer who showed up on campus. And I'd encourage everyone to watch the video clip. We'll try to get that attached to the show notes of you actually getting to talk with Holly about the award. What was that like for you to actually see someone you've seen on TV interviewing top collegiate athletes for years?
Yeah, well, I mean, like you said, Holly Rowe is one of the faces of college sports, and she's one of the faces of ESPN. I mean, it seems like she is a part of every huge college football game or basketball game in some way. That you'll usually hear like the commentators of these games, they'll be calling a game and then they'll say, let's go to Holly Rowe on the sideline to hear more about such and such. And then I guess just like this idea of Holly Rowe court side or field side with a microphone is a staple of college sports. So, when I saw her walking out with a microphone to introduce me in this award, it felt surreal.
Yeah, can you imagine?
Like,
probably,
wow,
it's got to still be a little bit that way. I mean, for what you've accomplished in a couple of years in college, most people don't do it in a lifetime. So you got a lot ahead of you, but totally impressed with what you've accomplished. Your family and friends have got to be so proud. Any thoughts for other college students who might look at what you've done and heard the answers to the questions you've given today and think, gosh, it seems like so much. I'd love to do it, but maybe don't have the energy or the passion that Aidan came with to Loyola. Any ways you think they could maybe break through those challenges to take on a big opportunity like you've created at Loyola for Special Olympics?
Well, like I said, it was a long process, and I think like one thing I try to stick to with any of these like big projects or processes is trying to do something every day towards that goal. And then in addition to that, I mentioned like how many people were involved with helping get this started. And so there's certainly something to be said about, asking for help and allowing other people to help you and finding others that have that same mission or goal in mind. And I mean, there's so many people that I can thank. And, I told you about like you needed a faculty advisor, you needed an executive board, you needed people to be passionate about this, and I've certainly found those people at Loyola. It really speaks to the kind of community that Loyola has on campus.
Awesome answer. And I guess I'll leave our listeners with you getting the final word, that if there's any final words of wisdom to the world at large, the disability community, your peers, anything you want to share with the world that you haven't already talked about with regards to Misericordia, Loyola, sports, involvement, you get the final word.
Yeah, I think I'm just so thankful for the kind of recognition that this has brought to these kinds of initiatives. Like, I feel so grateful to be at a university and on a soccer team that values recognizing that. And just, reflecting back on my experience here at Loyola, I would just encourage others to find, where they can contribute in their own way. Like I said, when I came to Loyola, there's no opportunity to be involved with Special Olympics. And I knew with the prior experiences that I had with Special Olympics, as well as, where I was situated on campus within the athletic department and the kind of connections that brings, it was clear that, this was one way that I could contribute and try to leave a lasting impact at Loyola. And so it's been a long process to get this started. And I feel like I was set up well and put in a position to contribute in this way. And again, it just makes me so grateful and wishful that others can find those same kind of opportunities in their own environments and in their own ways.
Wayne, thanks so much for that. I think on behalf of everybody who's listening to this, we'll be rooting you and your Loyola Ramblers on to a very successful conclusion to your soccer season and obviously for the rest of your career and your life. You're a wonderful young man, and I think the future's going to be very, very bright for you and all the people you touch. So thanks so much for being part of our podcast today.
Thank you. I appreciate this conversation.
Thank you for listening. Please refer to the show notes on how to connect with Aidan and to learn more about the organizations mentioned. If you would like to suggest a guest for a future podcast, please email me at aaron@oakwealth.com. See you next time.